when it comes to breakfast in particular, or even like the meal that you would otherwise eat before your workout, are you into fasted workouts?
I still love my fasted workouts, but I've made a really conscious effort to deliberately not do fasted workouts some days, just because the evidence is there that like you want to kind of maintain what's called glucose tolerance, where if you don't use it, you lose it to a certain degree. So in the same sense that if you don't occasionally train fasted, it's going to be really hard for you to train fasted. Like people that have never trained fasted, the first time they train fasted, they're like, where's all my energy? Well, you don't have the mitochondrial machinery to sort of help you with that. That makes perfect sense. It actually goes the other way too, right? So I used to fasted train so much to the point where I would actually bash having food before, at least for myself, because I'm like, if I have food before, like I feel sluggish, I feel doggish. And then you're like, well, actually it started with the rodent model literature. Then there's been a few human models on it. It's like, you actually, like even in the short term, you're going to not have that good of glucose tolerance. So you're basically making it so these carbs that are coming in are not efficiently getting in the way that they ordinarily would. So now I make a deliberate effort where like 2 days a week, I do have carbohydrates prior to a workout, just because I'm like, even though it's not necessarily quote unquote optimal for me, it's kind of helping it so that I can switch back and forth or substrate switch a little bit better.
Yeah. I used to exclusively train fasted. And then I took up boxing over the pandemic, and I really saw the value of pre-workout carbs. Because boxing is a really specific kind of workout. It's like high intensity interval training, but it's just like it's so demanding. It's so like glycolytic.
Yeah.
And I started when I started boxing, I was like doing that fasted just because that's how I like to, weight train. And I just saw that my energy would just like tank without some carbs in the system.
Yeah, man. And and the thing is unfortunately, and I used to be one of these people. So like, I'm just going to be real, fall on the sword here. It's like, it's just because you don't need carbs. It's just because they're, you're enabled, you basically have had carbs. There's an element of that is true predominantly in endurance work. Like, yes, you can go long periods of time with endurance work without carbohydrates. 3.7 grams or so every 20 minutes to be exact. And that's just to prevent exercise-induced hypoglycemia. Above and beyond that, you're beta oxidative, so it doesn't really matter. But when you are someone that is actually exercising at a high intensity, like you do notice it with some carbs on board, for sure. You definitely notice an improvement in your ability to maintain. And it's pure like substrate utilization. You are chaining in that mode. And if your glycogen stores are topped off, then yeah, that's gonna help you out. And if you do have a consistent stream coming in at a certain rate, there is something psychological happening as well. We've seen this with like the maltodextrin studies where they would take flavorless maltodextrin and have people swish it around in their mouth. Purely like swishing some carbohydrates in the mouth would give a boost. So there's something that's psychological happening when carbohydrates hit our mouth that might actually help us. So this is coming from a low carb guy too. So I'm just being very real here that like, yes, I prefer to train in a low carb fasted state. I feel better. But when I'm really doing something demanding or I want to be explosive, you're going to bet that carbs come on board. They definitely do. They give me that extra little 10% that I need for that explosiveness.
And what are your favorite sources of carbs these days?
I might get kind of flamed for saying this, but like have no affiliation with them, but the Momentous Fuel, have you used that one?
No.
It's like a form of, it's almost like cyclic dextrin. It's a form of carbohydrate that rapidly absorbs, but isn't high glucose spiking. So you're not getting this major spike, but you're getting rapid absorption. Cool. So pretty stable. So that's one of the cool, like kind of liquid carbohydrates. So it's funny because like I won't eat like starch or something like that before my workout. If I'm going to have carbs because I train first thing in the morning, it's usually some form of benign liquid carb, right? Like I'm not going to go have a high fructose corn syrup or something like that, but I'm usually going to have something that I can be in a little bit of control with. Usually something that's along the lines of more pure glucose. Like fructose doesn't really have a place for me unless I was doing a little combination. Again, if you go down the weird rabbit hole of like why Gatorade was created, right? The combination of sodium transporters and sodium glucose transporters, S-GLUT1, where you're using a little bit of glucose, a little bit of fructose, and a little bit of salt. You are going to get maximum hydration that way, but at what cost, right? Like you're taking in garbage. So for me, it's something pretty simple. I'm not even afraid to have like a little bit of flavorless dextrose or something like that. Something that sounds so terrible when you're talking about it from like a blood glucose standpoint, right? Why would I ever want to drink a glass or like 20 grams of pure dextrose? Well, because maybe I want something that's going to like just absorb fast, get into my bloodstream and not have any kind of digestive load whatsoever. So I get pretty utilitarian about the kind of carbs that I use, but whatever.
I dig it. I think you've got to find what works for you. I think there's this perception that you win some kind of moral brownie points for eating lower carb, that that any additional carbs you intake beyond what your body, I don't know, needs to sustain itself is like you're losing karma points for it. But it's like, if eating more carbs works for you to make you feel better about your workout and gives you more energy, then by all means do it. I mean, it's not that carbs are inherently fattening or obesogenic or promote glucose intolerance or anything like that. It's about the dietary pattern as a whole. It's about your lifestyle, your energy intake. So I like this this newly adopted Thomas DeLauer flexible mindset.
Well, it's especially if you're fit, right? Like, especially if you're fit. If you're not insulin resistant and you're already active and already fit, I think it's a pretty negligible difference either way, right? Whether you want to train with carbs on board or without. So at that point, you got to find like what's really hitting hard for you, what's working the best. Because if you're already fit, you're going to be incinerating those carbohydrates so fast. Your mitochondria is functioning well. You're not in this point where you're, insulin resistant and not able to utilize those carbs properly. Which, dude, have you seen people doing this like sugar diet, sugar fasting? Have you seen Mark Bell recently?
No.
Oh my God, dude.
Tell me.
We got to talk about this.
I love Mark. Shout out to Mark.
Mark is like my boy. He's one of my best friends. And he sometimes kind of taunts me with things just because Mark is known for he'll experiment, whatever. Like, he's just an OG, and he's got he can just do whatever he wants. Like,
savage.
Yeah. So he's doing this thing that like Cole Robinson, the old snake diet guy, was doing, where it's like it's flat out a sugar diet. He's having like Sour Patch Kids for breakfast. I mean, this stuff is wild. Okay. And pure sugar, extremely low protein, like pure sugar, like crazy stuff. And then in the evening time, he'll stack on some protein on there to try to get to close to like 0.8 to 1 gram per pound. The dude is getting diced beyond belief. Granted, his calories are pretty low, so it would be expected. But there's some interesting mechanisms that are going on there. It's this thing called, have you ever heard of fibroblast growth factor 21?
No. What is this?
It sounds like
witchcraft.
Witchcraft, or like some like, like something like a South Park episode, like, here's the fibroblast, So FGF21 is another messenger molecule, kind of like a myokine, that's essentially having these downstream effects on. We've seen FGF21 elevated when people fast, right? That's not uncommon, and it increases uncoupling, so it increases brown fat quite significantly in case basically the dissipation of heat out of the mitochondria, so you're burning calories as heat, but in significant amounts. Like when FGF21 is ramped up, it's pretty significant. We also see it in obese people where FGF21 goes really, really high, but it isn't actually docking at the proper site. Now, what we've kind of learned is, remember when we were all teenagers and when we would consume sugar, and sugar would actually make us bounce off the walls?
Yeah.
It would actually give us energy. And then somewhere along the line, in our 20s and 30s, it's like sugar started doing the opposite. It's like you'd have sugar and you'd crash. You didn't feel the get up and the high from it. How come when you give a 7-year-old sugar, they're uncontrollable? But if you give a 40-year-old sugar, he gets a hit for a fraction of a minute, right? And then it's all just neurochemistry. It's not even getting a physical effect. Why do kids get jittery and want to run around the block? So researchers were looking at this with mice, and they were finding the same kind of thing when they would put mice on these high sucrose diets, not carbohydrate as sucrose, but not like starch, but pure sucrose. Even in calorie match situations, they would end up losing more fat. And they're like, what's going on? So there's been some human models with this, but then they found that this FGF21 would elevate, which is the same thing that would start elevating like later in a multi-day fast. Long story long, there's this wild fat burning effect that comes from elevating FGF21 in an already healthy, metabolically healthy person. So huge caveat that if someone was insulin resistant or obese, and I'll come back to that and why in a second, it would probably not be the best thing to do. But if you recall, I mentioned that obese people would also have these high levels of FGF21, but they also had FGF21 resistance. So essentially FGF21 would go up, but it would never really dock. We also find that in most people, with the exception of people that are very metabolically healthy and have been active, i.e. Mark Bell, right? Someone like that, that this FGF21 receptivity goes down as we age too. So essentially, that's kind of what happens is like when you're a kid, you're very receptive to this FGF21. It actually does give you energy, and it actually does make you sweat and give you this induced thermogenesis and all these other like uncoupling benefits where you're like, yes, sugar, because the body's like, hey, I got energy. It's the way that we all wish it would work, right? Like, wouldn't we all wish that like if we go and sat down and ate, that everything was supply driven, not demand driven? Like we could sit down and we could be like, I'm gonna eat 2,000 calories and it's gonna give me 2,000 calories of energy and I'm gonna go lift rocks. It doesn't quite work like that. But as a kid, it, in a weird way, it kind of does. So anyway, Mark's doing this. He's getting shredded from it. I created some videos. I haven't even released them on it because he's just getting destroyed about it. And like, in a fun way, because Mark's just like, yeah, like race to 0 followers. Let's do it. Have at it. Have at it. I don't need you guys. But I'm like, I want to do some videos on this because Mark hits me up on these things. And he's like, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And I'm fascinated by it. I haven't tried it. I haven't tried the sugar fast, but I'm seeing other people talking about it and it's becoming a thing. And mark my words, over the next few months, like there's going to be a lot of people kind of talking about it. And I think it's kind of important that people just understand that this isn't like a fast kind of thing that a metabolically unhealthy person should do. It will still spike your HbA1c like mad. But if you are super fit and you're already like 10% body fat and you're wanting to get crazy shredded, yeah, it does have merit to it. But you're keeping fat super, super low and you're keeping protein actually pretty low, except for like finite periods of time. The other reason it works, I know I'm going off on a lot here, but the other reason that it works is simply by sheer contrast, right? Like when you have a lot of dietary fat coming in, someone like Mark, who has been doing a low carb diet for a really long time, like he really predominantly has low carb, high fat for years. You are upregulating every process. Your body's very much so used to using dietary fat and having that come in. When all of a sudden you rip that away, the body's going to be like, well, wait a minute, I'm still all primed for fats. So it's going to start pulling from your actual stored body fat a little bit easier because you've been conditioning it for years that fat is the primary fuel source. Now, yes, we're all capable of using both fuels, but we are going to tilt the scale towards whatever we eat more of because that's just a simple adaptation. So he's got all these things working for him, which is why he's like dropped like 10 pounds in a week doing it. It's nuts. Like, but anyway, so
it's
you
so
hear
cool.
about that.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.